The morning sun cast golden rays through the cathedral's stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the stone floor. St. Michael's Cathedral had witnessed countless unions, but today felt different, electric with anticipation. Isabella Martinez stood before an ornate mirror in the bridal suite, her reflection showing a vision in ivory silk. The dress, a family heirloom passed down through 3 generations, hugged her curves perfectly before cascading into an elegant train. Her dark hair was swept into an intricate updo, adorned with her grandmother's pearl hairpins. "You look absolutely radiant," whispered her maid of honor, Sarah, as she adjusted the delicate veil. Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the fabric of her dress. After 2 years of planning, the day had finally arrived. Outside, guests were already taking their seats, the soft murmur of conversations mixing with the gentle notes of the string quartet. Everything was exactly as she had dreamed, the flowers, the music, the setting, yet somewhere deep in her chest, a small knot of nervousness refused to dissolve. She attributed it to normal wedding jitters, pushing aside the fleeting thought that something felt incomplete about this perfect day. 3 floors above, James Wellington adjusted his platinum cufflinks for the 3rd time, his reflection in the Georgian mirror showing a man who seemed to have everything. At 35, he was the heir to Wellington Industries, a conglomerate that had shaped the city's skyline for over a century. His tailored tuxedo fit like a second skin, and his smile radiated the confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Today, he was marrying not just the woman he loved, but cementing a union that would merge 2 prominent families. "Nervous?" asked his best man, Marcus, straightening his own bow tie. James shook his head, though his fingers drummed against the mahogany dresser. "Why would I be nervous? I'm marrying the most beautiful woman in the city." The words came easily, practiced from months of interviews and society page features. Yet, as he spoke them, something felt rehearsed, as if he were reading lines from a script. He dismissed the thought quickly. Cold feet were normal, his father had assured him. Love was a luxury. Strategic marriages built empires. Still, as he gazed out the window at the gathering crowd below, James couldn't shake the feeling that this day would change everything in ways he couldn't yet understand. The cathedral's main doors stood open like arms, welcoming the city's elite. A red carpet stretched from the street to the altar, flanked by towering arrangements of white roses and baby's breath. Luxury vehicles pulled up in an endless parade, Bentleys, Rolls-Royces and sleek Maseratis, each depositing impeccably dressed guests onto the sidewalk. The women glided in designer gowns that cost more than most people's annual salaries, their jewelry catching the afternoon light like captured starlight. The men, distinguished in their bespoke suits, moved with the practiced ease of those born into privilege. Mrs. Elizabeth Wellington, James's mother, greeted guests with regal grace, her silver hair perfectly coiffed and her sapphire necklace, a wedding gift from her late husband, gleaming against her navy dress. She had orchestrated every detail of this day with military precision, ensuring it would be remembered as the social event of the decade. Across the aisle, Isabella's family welcomed their guests with warm embraces and genuine smiles, their joy infectious despite the obvious difference in social standing. The cathedral filled slowly, conversations mixing in multiple languages as business partners, family friends and society figures found their seats. Everyone who mattered was there, except for one conspicuous absence that only a few would notice. The string quartet's gentle melody gave way to the powerful notes of the pipe organ, signaling the ceremony's beginning. A hush fell over the congregation as all eyes turned toward the back of the cathedral. The bridesmaids processed down the aisle in flowing lavender silk, their bouquets of white peonies and eucalyptus creating a soft, romantic atmosphere. Each step was measured, graceful, as they had practiced countless times during rehearsals. At the altar, James stood tall beside Father Michael, a family friend who had baptized him 35 years earlier. The priest's warm smile and gentle demeanor had comforted 3 generations of Wellingtons through life's most significant moments. James's hands were clasped behind his back, his posture straight and confident, though those closest to him might have noticed the slight tension in his jaw. The congregation rose as one when the bridal march began, the cathedral's acoustics carrying the majestic melody to every corner of the sacred space. Flowers adorned every pew, their fragrance mixing with the faint scent of ancient stone and centuries of prayers. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the union of 2 of the city's most prominent families, a merger of hearts and fortunes that would reshape the social landscape. The massive oak doors at the cathedral's entrance swung open with ceremonial grandeur, revealing Isabella on her father's arm. A collective intake of breath swept through the congregation as she appeared, ethereal in the afternoon light streaming through the stained glass. Her dress seemed to float as she moved, the antique lace catching and reflecting light with each step. The train, carefully arranged by her attendants, flowed behind her like liquid silk, creating a picture of timeless elegance. Carlos Martinez, Isabella's father, walked with measured pride beside his daughter. A successful architect who had built his firm from nothing, he understood the significance of this moment, not just for Isabella, but for their entire family's legacy. His eyes glistened with unshed tears as they moved down the aisle, passing faces of friends and family who had supported their journey. Isabella's smile was radiant, though her heart raced with more than just excitement. Something felt different today, as if the very air around her hummed with possibility and change. The guests' faces blurred as she focused on James waiting at the altar, yet her steps faltered almost imperceptibly when her gaze swept the congregation. For just a moment, she thought she glimpsed a familiar silhouette near the back, but when she looked again, the shadows revealed nothing unusual. Father Michael's voice resonated through the cathedral with the authority of decades spent officiating life's most sacred moments. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and this congregation to witness the union of Isabella Maria Martinez and James Alexander Wellington in holy matrimony. The ancient words carried weight beyond their meaning, connecting this moment to countless ceremonies that had come before. The congregation settled into comfortable silence, broken only by the gentle shuffling of programs and the occasional soft cough. Isabella and James faced each other, her hands trembling slightly in his, as Father Michael spoke of love, commitment, and the sacred bond of marriage. The priest's words about partnership, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion seemed to float through the cathedral like incense, touching each heart in the congregation. Isabella found herself truly looking into James's eyes for the first time that day, searching for something she couldn't quite name. His gaze was steady, confident, but she sensed layers beneath the surface that remained unspoken. James, for his part, felt the magnitude of the moment settling over him like a mantle. This was more than a wedding. It was a promise that would define the rest of their lives, a commitment that extended far beyond the 2 of them to encompass families, legacies, and futures yet unwritten. "James," Father Michael intoned, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the cathedral, "do you take Isabella to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to love, honor, and cherish her, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" The traditional words hung in the air like a sacred oath, each syllable weighted with centuries of tradition. James's voice rang clear and strong as he responded, "I do." His smile was confident, practiced, the smile of a man who had never doubted his path. He slipped the platinum wedding band onto Isabella's finger, the ring catching the light from the stained glass windows above. The metal was warm from his touch, and Isabella felt its weight as both comfort and commitment. The congregation watched with rapt attention, many dabbing at their eyes with delicate handkerchiefs. Now came Isabella's moment. Father Michael turned to her, his kind eyes reflecting years of wisdom and understanding. "Isabella, do you take James to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to love, honor, and cherish him in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" The question seemed to echo longer than it should have, reverberating through the cathedral's ancient stones. Isabella opened her mouth to speak, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird. The word "yes" formed on her lips, ready to seal her fate forever. The cathedral's massive doors groaned open with a sound that cut through the sacred silence like thunder. Every head turned in unison, creating a wave of movement that rippled through the congregation from back to front. The afternoon sun, streaming through the doorway, created a dramatic silhouette, a tall figure in an impeccably tailored suit, his presence commanding attention without uttering a single word. The string quartet's gentle background melody faltered, then stopped entirely as the musician's concentration shattered. Isabella's word died in her throat, unspoken. Her face, which had been flushed with bridal excitement moments before, drained of all color as recognition dawned. The bouquet trembled in her hands, white petals beginning to fall like snow onto the cathedral floor. James's confident expression cracked, his jaw tightening as he followed Isabella's gaze to the uninvited guest. A murmur began to ripple through the congregation, whispers of recognition, confusion, and growing tension. The figure stepped fully into the cathedral, and the afternoon light revealed his face clearly. Alexander Blackwood, tech mogul, and one of the youngest billionaires in the world, moved down the aisle with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to stopping rooms with his presence. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his grey eyes scanning the frozen tableau before him with an intensity that made several guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. He had been absent from the city for 3 years, and his sudden return, at this moment, in this place, sent shockwaves through those who recognized him. Time seemed suspended in amber as Alexander continued his deliberate walk down the aisle. His footsteps on the stone floor echoed like a countdown, each step measured and purposeful. The congregation sat transfixed, torn between the impropriety of staring and their inability to look away. Mrs. Wellington's face had gone rigid with barely contained horror. She knew exactly who Alexander Blackwood was and what his presence here meant. Her carefully orchestrated perfect day was crumbling before her eyes. Isabella's breathing became shallow, rapid. She felt as though the cathedral walls were closing in on her, the weight of hundreds of eyes and 3 years of buried emotions pressing down like a physical force. Her knees threatened to buckle, and only James's steadying hand on her arm kept her upright. James himself seemed carved from stone, his face a mask of controlled fury and confusion. He had questions, so many questions, but this was neither the time nor the place for answers. Father Michael, caught between his duty to the ceremony and the obvious distress of the bride, hesitated at the altar. His decades of experience had prepared him for many situations, but never this. Alexander stopped halfway down the aisle, his presence filling the space between himself and the altar with unspoken words and barely contained emotion. The silence stretched taut as a violin string, threatening to snap at any moment. In the back pews, guests began to whisper more urgently, phones discreetly appearing as people realized they were witnessing what would undoubtedly become the most talked-about wedding interruption in the city's social history. "Hello, Isabella." Alexander's voice carried clearly through the cathedral's acoustics, deep and rich with emotions carefully held in check. Those 2 simple words contained 3 years of separation, unfinished conversations, and feelings that had never been properly laid to rest. The congregation collectively held its breath, sensing they were witnessing something far more intimate and complex than a simple wedding crash. Isabella's bouquet slipped from nerveless fingers, the white roses scattering across the altar steps like fallen stars. "Alex," she whispered, the name escaping her lips before she could stop it. The single word carried such pain, such longing, that even strangers in the congregation felt their hearts clench. James's head snapped toward his bride, his eyes searching her face for explanations that weren't coming. Mrs. Wellington rose from her seat, her face a study in controlled panic. She had worked too hard, planned too carefully, invested too much in this union to let it crumble now. But even her considerable social authority seemed powerless against the force of Alexander's presence. He stood in her perfectly orchestrated ceremony like a stone thrown into still water, the ripples of his arrival spreading outward, touching everyone present. Alexander's gaze never left Isabella's face, as if the hundreds of other people in the cathedral had simply ceased to exist. "I know I have no right to be here," he continued, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was doing, "but I couldn't let you do this without knowing—" He paused, the weight of his next words visible in the tension of his shoulders, the set of his jaw. The entire cathedral waited, suspended between one heartbeat and the next, for whatever revelation would either shatter or preserve the sacred moment they had come to witness. The silence stretched like a held breath as Isabella stared at Alexander, memories flooding back with painful clarity. She remembered their last conversation 3 years ago, harsh words spoken in anger, pride preventing either of them from backing down, and the devastating misunderstanding that had driven them apart. Alexander had left for Silicon Valley the next day to build his empire, while Isabella had tried to rebuild her life piece by piece. "Please," James's voice cut through the tension, low but carrying clearly in the cathedral's acoustics. "Whatever this is, we can discuss it after—" But Alexander raised a hand, his eyes never leaving Isabella's face. The gesture wasn't dismissive, but it was clear he wouldn't be deterred from his purpose. The congregation watched this drama unfold with the fascination of people witnessing history in the making. Isabella felt the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. Her engagement to James had been a careful choice. He was kind, stable, everything her family wanted for her. But standing here now, with Alexander's presence filling the space between them like an electrical current, she couldn't deny the truth she had buried for 3 years. Her heart had never fully healed from their separation, and seeing him now, successful beyond measure but with that familiar vulnerability in his grey eyes, threatened to undo every wall she had carefully constructed. Mrs. Wellington stepped into the aisle, her voice carrying the authority of generations of social prominence. "Mr. Blackwood, this is neither the time nor the place for whatever business you think you have here." But Alexander's slight smile suggested he had anticipated this resistance, and his next words would prove that he had not come unprepared for the battle ahead. "I'm not here for business, Mrs. Wellington," Alexander replied, his voice carrying a warmth that surprised those who knew only his public persona. "I'm here because I've spent 3 years trying to build a life without the most important part of it." His words rippled through the congregation like stones thrown into still water. "Isabella, I know you think I chose my company over you, over us, but you never gave me the chance to explain what really happened that night." Isabella's world tilted on its axis. The fight that had ended their relationship, about his late-night meetings, his secretive behavior, her feeling abandoned and unimportant, suddenly seemed less clear-cut than it had 3 years ago. "Alex, you don't understand," she began, but he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I was planning to propose," he said simply, the words dropping into the cathedral silence like bombs. "Every late meeting, every secret conversation, I was designing a ring, planning the perfect moment. I had bought the building where we first met, planning to renovate it into our dream home. The congregation gasped collectively, the romantic gesture so grand it belonged in movies, not real life. James stepped forward, his face a mask of controlled anger. "This is my wedding day, our wedding day." But Isabella was staring at Alexander as if seeing him for the first time, her mind rewriting every moment of their final weeks together. The secretiveness she had interpreted as distance had been preparation for forever. The late nights she had resented had been spent crafting their future, and she had been too hurt, too proud, too afraid to listen when he tried to explain. Isabella felt the cathedral spinning around her, the faces of 300 guests blurring into a sea of expectation and judgment. James's hand on her arm was steady, reliable, everything she had convinced herself she wanted. But Alexander's presence awakened something in her that had been sleeping for 3 years, a part of her soul that had withered without the passion and intensity he brought to her life. "I need a moment," she whispered, but in the cathedral's acoustics, her words carried to every corner. Father Michael, wise in the ways of human hearts, stepped forward. "Perhaps we might take a brief recess," he suggested gently. But Mrs. Wellington's sharp voice cut through his diplomatic attempt at resolution. "Absolutely not. This is a sacred ceremony, not a circus." But her words rang hollow in the face of the raw emotion crackling between Isabella and Alexander. The congregation sensed they were witnessing something that transcended social propriety, a love story being written in real time, messy and complicated and absolutely human. Alexander took another step closer, close enough now that Isabella could see the flecks of gold in his grey eyes, could smell the familiar scent of his cologne that had once been as comforting as home. "Bella," he said, using the nickname only he had ever called her, "I know I have no right to ask this of you. I know I hurt you, and I know you've built a life without me. But before you say yes to forever with someone else, I need you to know that not a day has passed that I haven't regretted letting you walk away." Isabella closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 2 futures pressing down on her. One safe and planned, the other uncertain but alive with possibility. When she opened them again, her gaze moved between the 2 men who represented such different paths, such different versions of herself. The cathedral had become a theatre, and Isabella stood center stage with the weight of 300 witnesses and 2 very different futures pressing down on her shoulders. James's face showed hurt and confusion, but also a growing understanding that the woman he thought he knew was more complex than he had realized. Alexander waited with the patience of a man who had already lost everything once and understood the magnitude of what he was asking. "James," Isabella said softly, turning to face her groom fully for the first time since Alexander's arrival, "you are a good man, a wonderful man, and you deserve someone who can love you with her whole heart." Her voice grew stronger with each word, clarity beginning to cut through the chaos of emotions. "But I can't stand here and promise you forever when I know that part of me never stopped loving someone else." The congregation erupted in whispers, but Isabella continued, her voice rising above the murmur. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for letting it come to this, for not being honest with myself or with you sooner." She began removing the engagement ring, the massive diamond catching the cathedral light one last time before she placed it gently in James's palm. Mrs. Wellington's gasp of horror was audible even over the growing buzz of conversation, but Isabella had found her courage now. She turned to Alexander, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You broke my heart," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the cathedral. "You made me feel like I wasn't important enough to fight for. How do I know that won't happen again?" Alexander's answer came without hesitation, his voice strong and sure. "Because this time, I'm not walking away." This time, I'm fighting for us in front of everyone who matters to you, risking everything I've built because you matter more than my pride, more than my fear, more than anything else in my world." Isabella felt something shift inside her chest, like a lock finally turning after years of trying different keys. She looked at Alexander, really looked at him, and saw not just the billionaire who had built an empire, but the man who had once made her laugh until her sides ached, who had held her through her father's illness, who had believed in her dreams even when she didn't believe in herself. "I must be completely insane," she whispered, but her voice carried hope instead of fear. She stepped toward Alexander, leaving her position at the altar, and the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. "If we do this," she said, her voice growing stronger, "we do it right this time. No secrets, no pride, no running away when things get difficult." "No running away," Alexander agreed, his smile transforming his entire face. "Just us, figuring it out together." He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Isabella took it. The simple contact sent electricity through both of them, a reminder of what they had shared and what they might share again. The cathedral erupted in chaos, some guests shocked, others delighted by the unexpected turn of events. Mrs. Wellington looked as though she might faint, while Isabella's parents exchanged glances that suggested they had always harbored doubts about James's ability to make their daughter truly happy. Father Michael, ever the diplomat, cleared his throat and announced that perhaps this would be a good time for everyone to proceed to the reception hall, where refreshments would be served while the families sorted through the day's unexpected developments. As the congregation began to file out in excited clusters of conversation, Isabella and Alexander remained standing together in the cathedral's golden light, their hands clasped, their futures uncertain but alive with possibility. It wasn't the wedding anyone had planned, but it was honest in a way that mattered more than perfect execution. Thank you so much for listening to our story today. Wedding days are meant to be about love in all its forms, messy, complicated, surprising, and ultimately transformative. We hope Isabella and Alexander's story reminded you that sometimes the most important moments in our lives come disguised as disruptions to our carefully laid plans. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Where are you listening from today? Have you ever had a moment where love required you to completely change course? Your stories and perspectives from around the world help make our community richer and more connected. Whether you're joining us from New York or New Delhi, São Paulo or Stockholm, your voice matters to us. Until next time, remember that the best love stories aren't always the ones that follow the script. They're the ones written from the heart.